Clara Hill was 29 when her life split cleanly in two, though she didn't realize it yet. She sat beside her fiancé, Mason Cole, at their rehearsal dinner inside a warm Italian restaurant glowing with soft candles. It was the same place where they had shared their third date, the one Mason confessed he had been nervous about. Clara remembered laughing then, believing it was the start of something real. About 40 people filled the long table expecting a joyful night. But one careless moment would shatter everything Clara believed about the man she was meant to marry. Mason sat beside her wearing the navy blazer she picked for him, his arm resting comfortably behind her chair. Everything looked perfect until Jenna, one of Mason's old college friends, joked about how everyone in their friend group had gotten engaged the same year. Like dominoes falling, she laughed. Mason, after a sip of wine, laughed even louder. Honestly, he said, waving his hand carelessly, I only said yes because everyone else was getting married. Silence lasted one beat. Then laughter broke around the table, genuine laughter. Everyone joined except Clara, who felt her heart slowly collapsing. Clara lifted her glass and whispered, I guess tomorrow will be unforgettable. But no one really heard her. Mason tapped her glass without meeting her eyes, already laughing with Jenna again. The rest of the dinner passed like a distant echo. Clara watched Mason smile with her family, pose for pictures and speak as if nothing had gone wrong. But each smile sounded like his words replaying in her mind. When dinner ended, Mason kissed her cheek lightly. See you at the altar tomorrow, he said gently. Clara nodded, though something inside her no longer felt whole. She sat in her car afterward for 30 silent minutes, gripping the steering wheel as her breath trembled. Had she imagined the cruelty in his voice? No. Mason had said it plainly and everyone laughed like her feelings did not matter. At home, clarity settled over her like cold air. She opened his phone messages, something she rarely did. She found the group chat with his college friends and began scrolling. Jenna had written, Wow, you actually proposed. Mason replied, What else could I do? Everyone's getting married. Clara's fingers chilled as she continued reading. More messages cut deeper. Mason wrote that Clara was steady, that she would make a dependable wife, and that love isn't important, compatibility is. He joked about the wedding planning and revealed plans to move back to his hometown someday, plans Clara had never heard. She sat on her couch, phone shaking in her hand. Then she called her best friend. Rosa, she whispered, I need you tomorrow morning. 7 a.m. At the venue. Rosa paused, asking softly what was wrong. Clara swallowed her tears and replied, Just trust me. She didn't sleep as the night crawled toward dawn. By dawn, Clara sat at her kitchen table with her laptop glowing in the darkness. She could still hear Mason's voice from dinner, sharp and careless. At 3:47 a.m. she accepted the truth. This wedding could not go on. She opened the honeymoon reservation and clicked cancel. Then she canceled their hotel for the wedding night. Her fingers moved calmly, almost professionally. At 4:15 a.m. she called the venue's emergency line. When the manager answered sleepily, Clara said, This is Clara Hill. I need a major change to today's ceremony. The woman hesitated. What change? Clara exhaled. Remove the arch. The manager sounded confused. Remove it? And replace it with what? Clara stared at her dark reflection in the window. A large projection screen. Center front. It must be there before the guests arrive. The manager grew quiet. Ms. Hill, is everything okay? Clara shook her head even though she couldn't be seen. No. But I'm certain. At 5 a.m. Clara began building a presentation. Nothing dramatic, just screenshots, dates and Mason's own words. She's steady. Love doesn't matter. I only said yes because everyone else was getting married. She enlarged each message so no one could pretend they misunderstood. At 7 a.m., Rosa arrived at the venue wearing sweats and a worried expression. She rushed to Clara's side. Okay, she said breathlessly, talk to me. Clara handed her the phone silently. Rosa scrolled, her face shifting from confusion to shock to pure anger. Clara, she whispered, he said this? And he said it out loud too. Clara nodded, her jaw tight. I'm not going through with the wedding, she said. I'm going through with the truth. Rosa followed her toward the ceremony garden, stopping when she saw the massive projection screen where the floral arch was meant to be. Clara, Rosa breathed, stunned. This is bold. Clara didn't smile. He made me a joke, she replied softly. Today we stopped pretending. Guests began arriving around 10:45 a.m. while Clara hid inside the small office beside the garden. She peeked through a narrow window as people took their seats. Her parents arrived first, her mother uneasy, her father proud. Mason's family followed, smiling excitedly. His friends, including Jenna, walked in laughing and adjusting their ties. And then Mason arrived, calm, confident, smiling like yesterday had never happened. Clara's breath caught. Rosa touched her shoulder gently. You ready? Clara didn't answer. At exactly 11 a.m. the music began. Mason walked down the aisle with his mother at his side, waving politely at guests who stood to greet him. When he reached the front and lifted his eyes, he froze. The screen lit up instantly, displaying the first slide. I only said yes because everyone else was getting married. His face drained of color. His mother leaned forward, whispering, "What is that?" The guests murmured, shocked, confused. Mason slowly looked toward the office window, and saw Clara. She stepped out, steady and calm. Every head turned as Clara walked down the aisle alone. Clara stopped about 10 feet from Mason. The entire garden held its breath. Mason's voice came out small, nothing like the confident man who walked in minutes earlier. Clara, what is this? She gestured calmly toward the screen. The truth, she said. You made our future a joke. I just made sure everyone heard the punchline. Mason's mother gasped. Turn that off now, she demanded. Clara looked directly at her. Did you know? She asked loudly. Did you know he proposed because his friends were doing it? That he calls me steady like I'm a utility, not a person? Mason stepped forward, eyes wide with panic. Clara, please, he whispered. Can we talk in private? Clara shook her head gently. You had no interest in privacy when you laughed about me in front of a full dinner table. His shoulders sagged as whispers spread across the garden. The next slide appeared on the screen. She'll be a dependable wife. Love isn't important. Compatibility is. A wave of gasps rippled through the guests. Mason's mother covered her mouth. One of his friends muttered, Bro? Mason's voice broke. You're humiliating me. Clara tilted her head. No. I'm revealing you. Rosa stood quietly at the side, watching but not interfering. The venue manager hurried closer, eyes wide. Miss Hill, she whispered, we have another event after this. We can't keep this going much longer. Clara nodded. I'm finished, she said. She turned back to Mason, her voice steady. I hope you find someone you truly love, Mason. Someone you don't choose out of convenience. Someone you don't describe like a safe investment. Mason swallowed hard. Clara, I'm sorry. She held his gaze. Sorry doesn't undo the truth. Then she turned and walked back up the aisle as whispers exploded behind her. Chaos erupted the moment Clara crossed the garden exit. Guests whispered, recorded, argued, and tried to understand what they had witnessed. Mason's mother demanded someone fix it immediately, while Mason stood frozen at the front, staring at the ground. Rosa caught up to Clara outside the venue. Are you okay? She asked. Clara didn't trust her voice enough to answer. They walked quickly to the parking lot. When they reached the car, Clara's hands finally trembled. Rosa opened the passenger door. Let's go, she said softly. Clara nodded and whispered, anywhere but here. Then she drove away from the wreckage. The fallout hit immediately. By the time Clara and Rosa arrived at her apartment, her phone vibrated non-stop in her purse. Calls, messages, notifications, people suddenly desperate to be part of her story. Clara placed the purse on the counter and stared at it like it might explode. Rosa whispered, You should answer your mom. Clara shook her head. If I hear her voice right now, she said softly, I'll fall apart. She wasn't ready to be comforted. Comfort would make her collapse. So she turned off her phone and stepped into 3 days of silence, shutting out everything outside. Those 3 days felt unreal, like living inside a snow globe where the world outside stayed noisy, but she heard nothing. Rosa checked on her constantly, bringing food Clara barely touched. On the second night, Rosa finally asked the question she'd been holding back. Clara, people are going to say you went too far. Clara's eyes remained on the wall. I know. Rosa hesitated. Did you? Clara thought of Mason laughing at dinner, her heart cracking quietly while a whole table laughed. Then she thought of his messages. I don't know, she whispered. But I know I didn't start it. On the fourth day, Clara powered on her phone. 317 messages poured in. She read only the ones that mattered. Her mother wrote, I wish you had talked to us first, but I understand. You deserved honesty. Her father added, it took courage, not how I'd handle it, but I'm proud of you. Her younger brother wrote, Clara, are you okay? Everyone is talking about it. Then came Mason's messages. Voicemails jumping from apology to anger to desperation. Claire, please. I didn't mean it. You ruined my life. Please call me. She deleted each one without finishing it. A week later, an email from Mason's mother arrived. Long, sharp, filled with words like defamation, emotional distress, and public humiliation. Clara forwarded it to a lawyer Rosa recommended. The lawyer called the next morning. His tone was calm, almost amused. Clara, he said, these are screenshots of messages Mason wrote? Clara nodded. Yes. Then they have nothing. Truth is a complete defense. If he wrote it and you showed it, that isn't defamation. It's reality. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not triumph, but relief that the truth was still recognized somewhere. The threat stopped soon after. 2 weeks after the non-wedding, Mason appeared in Clara's building lobby. She had just returned from work when she saw him sitting on the bench near the mailboxes, looking completely unlike the polished man she once knew. His hair was messy, his eyes tired, and his hands clasped tightly together. When he saw her, he stood quickly. Clara, he whispered, please. 5 minutes. Curiosity pulled at her despite everything. She nodded once. 5. They stepped outside into the cold air and sat on a bench, a few feet apart, like strangers trying to decide if a conversation was worth having. I'm sorry, Mason began, staring at his hands. For everything, the dinner, the messages, all of it. Clara watched him quietly. Okay, she said. Mason blinked in confusion. That's it. She nodded. What else do you want? Mason leaned forward, voice cracking. I didn't mean those things. I was scared, confused, trying to be practical. Clara shook her head gently. You meant them when you wrote them. And you meant them when you said them. Mason swallowed hard. Clara, were you ever in love with me? She asked softly. He hesitated, only half a second but enough. Clara felt the answer settle painfully inside her. Mason finally whispered, I cared about you, Clara. I did. You made my life easier. You were steady. Clara breathed slowly, the same word cutting her again. Steady, she repeated quietly. Like furniture. Like something useful. Mason shook his head quickly. No, that's not what I meant. Clara kept her voice calm. But that's what you felt. You weren't in love with me, Mason. You were comfortable. His face crumpled. I thought love didn't matter, he whispered. I thought compatibility was enough. Clara looked away. That's the difference between us. I wanted a partner. You wanted convenience. Wind brushed past them as silence stretched. Mason wiped his eyes and whispered, Can't we try again? Can't we rebuild something? Clara shook her head slowly. We can't rebuild something that was never real to you. He leaned forward, desperate. But I'm in therapy. I'm learning. I'm trying to understand why I said those things. Clara didn't move. Therapy is good, she said gently. But it won't rewrite your choice. Mason closed his eyes, shoulders trembling. So this is really it? Clara nodded once. It ended the moment you laughed at me in front of everyone. A tear slipped down Mason's cheek. He whispered, I regret everything. I regret hurting you. Clara believed him. She could hear the truth in his cracking voice. But regret she knew wasn't love. She stood slowly. For what it's worth, she said softly, I hope you become a better man for someone else. Mason looked up sharply, the words cutting deeper than anger ever could. You really don't want me back? He asked. Claire met his eyes. No, Mason. I want better for myself. He swallowed hard, nodded once and stood. Goodbye, Clara, he whispered. Goodbye, she replied. He walked away slowly, each step heavy, like he was leaving behind something he finally understood too late. Clara watched him turn the corner and disappear from view. The quiet that followed felt strange, empty but peaceful. Rosa called her later that evening, asking softly, You okay? Clara sat by her window watching the streetlights flicker. I'm sad, she admitted. But I'm not broken. Rosa's voice warmed. That's strength, Clara. That's healing. Clara wasn't sure it was strength yet, but she knew one thing. She hadn't lost anything real. She had only uncovered a truth that saved her future. 3 months passed and life slowly grew calm again. Clara returned to her routines, her apartment feeling lighter without the weight of wedding plans. She cooked simple meals, read books she had forgotten about, and spent weekends walking through the park alone. But alone didn't feel like loneliness anymore. It felt like freedom. Friends asked whether she regretted the public reveal. Clara always paused before answering. Sometimes I wonder, she would say. Maybe I should have done it privately. But each time she remembered Mason laughing at dinner and the ache in her chest, the doubt disappeared instantly. One afternoon, Rosa visited with coffee and a mischievous smile. You know, people still talk about your wedding, she said. It's practically legend. Clara groaned softly. Rosa, please, I don't want to be a legend. Rosa laughed. Too late. You taught half the city what accountability looks like. Clara rolled her eyes but smiled. It wasn't meant for them, she said. It was meant for me. For the girl who kept quiet too long. Rosa squeezed her hand gently. You didn't embarrass him. He embarrassed himself. Clara breathed in slowly. I know. And I'm finally okay with that. A week later, Clara's therapist asked her a question that lingered. Clara, she said gently, what did you learn from all this? Clara stared at her hands, unsure. That people lie, she guessed. The therapist smiled softly. No. You already knew that. The lesson is deeper. Clara frowned. Then what? Her therapist leaned forward. That you deserve enthusiasm. You deserve someone who chooses you with joy, not pressure. Someone who sees you as a partner, not a plan. Clara felt something warm and painful settle inside her. She nodded slowly. I finally believe that. Days turned into weeks and Clara noticed something surprising. She began sleeping better. She started humming while cooking again. Her laughter returned, not loud at first but real. She no longer checked her phone expecting Mason's name. She no longer replayed the dinner or the garden or the screen lighting up in front of stunned guests. Her life wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. One evening, Rosa joined her on the balcony. You're glowing, Rosa teased. Clara laughed softly. I'm healing. Rosa smiled. Healing looks good on you. Clara looked at the sunset and whispered, it feels good too. Clara sometimes walked by the Italian restaurant where everything changed. Not to relive the pain but to observe how far she had come. She would stand across the street, remembering the warmth of that night and the cold shock that followed. But instead of bitterness, she felt gratitude. I could have married the wrong man, she whispered once. I could have built a life on a lie. The thought sent a shiver through her. She realized the disaster had saved her from years of silent disappointment. And that realization more than anything brought her peace. She spent more time with Rosa, rebuilt her connection with her family, and focused on rediscovering herself. One evening, her father took her aside and said, Clara, you did something brave. You walked away from a life that wasn't meant for you. Clara smiled gently. It didn't feel brave. He shook his head. Courage rarely feels like courage in the moment. Clara hugged him tightly. Later that night, she lay in bed thinking about those words. Maybe courage wasn't loud or dramatic. Maybe it was simply choosing truth over comfort. And finally, Clara felt proud of herself. Spring arrived slowly, and with it came a shift inside Clara that she didn't expect. She no longer felt the heavy knot in her chest when she thought about the wedding day. Instead, she felt clarity, like a window that had finally been wiped clean. One afternoon, while having lunch with Rosa, she said softly, You know, I'm grateful it happened. Rosa blinked. Grateful? Clara nodded. It showed me who he really was. And who I really am. Rosa smiled warmly. You're stronger than you think, Clara. Clara exhaled. I'm finally starting to believe that. A few days later, Clara walked into her office building feeling lighter. Her co-workers had been respectful, pretending not to know the story even though she could feel their curiosity around her. But today one of them, a quiet woman named Elise, approached her gently. Clara, she said, I saw the video going around. And I just wanted to say, you did the right thing. Clara paused, surprised. Elise added softly, Most women would have walked down that aisle anyway. You refused to lie to yourself. Clara smiled genuinely. Thank you, she replied. That means more than you know. That evening, Clara returned home and finally opened the last box of items from the cancelled wedding. Inside were the invitations, menus, ribbons, and the vows she never got to speak. She sat on the floor reading the words she once meant. I choose you, the paper said in her handwriting. Every day with joy. Clara folded the page gently. I choose me now, she whispered. She placed everything back inside and closed the box. For the first time it didn't hurt. It felt like closing a door she was never meant to walk through in the first place. Around that same time, Mason sent one final email. A long message filled with apologies, explanations, and a quiet hope for forgiveness. Clara read it slowly. His words were softer now, gentler, shaped by therapy and regret. But they didn't change the truth. She typed only one response. I hope you heal. But the chapter is closed. Mason replied with a single sentence. Thank you for being honest. Clara stared at the screen for a moment, then deleted the thread. Not out of anger but closure. She no longer needed the past shadowing her future. Summer warmed the city and Clara's world blossomed with it. She started joining Rosa for weekend hikes, discovered a new love for baking, and even signed up for a photography class. One afternoon during a lesson, the instructor, a kind man named Oliver, noticed her struggling to adjust a camera setting. He stepped beside her and said, Hey, Clara nodded. He guided her gently through the adjustment. She smiled. Thank you. I'm still learning. Oliver returned the smile. We all are. She didn't feel sparks or romance, only comfort. But comfort, she realized, didn't have to mean settling. Clara and Oliver became friendly in a quiet, natural way. After class one day he asked, Would you like to grab a coffee? Clara hesitated, then nodded. Over hot drinks and warm sunlight, they talked about books, childhood memories, and embarrassing moments from school. Oliver laughed easily but never at her, only with her. When they finished, he walked her to her car. This was nice, he said softly. Clara smiled. It was. He didn't ask for her number. He didn't rush. He simply said, See you next class, Clara. And for the first time in a long time she felt something hopeful. Driving home, Clara thought about how different this feeling was from what she had with Mason. There was no pressure, no performance, no silent competition to appear perfect. Just ease. Just breath. Just possibility. Rosa squealed when Clara told her later that night. Clara Hill, are you falling in love? Clara laughed. No. I'm learning to feel safe again. Rosa nodded proudly. That's even better. Clara leaned back against her couch, thinking about how far she had come. Healing didn't look like a new romance. It looked like learning to trust herself again. Weeks passed and Clara continued living her quiet, steady life. One morning she sat on her balcony with tea, watching the sunrise wash the sky in warm colors. She thought about the girl she used to be. The one who ignored small warnings, who believed love meant sacrificing her own voice, who accepted convenience disguised as affection. That girl wasn't weak. She was hopeful. But this Clara, this version of herself, was stronger. She whispered into the morning air, I'm glad she grew into me. And for the first time she felt truly proud of the woman she had become. On a late afternoon walk, Clara passed a small wedding ceremony in a park. The bride laughed loudly, her joy ringing through the air. The groom looked at her like she was the only person in the world. For a moment Clara stopped and watched. She didn't feel jealousy. She didn't feel sadness. She felt clarity. That's what I want someday, she murmured. Not perfection. Just honesty. She continued walking, the breeze brushing gently across her shoulders. She knew she didn't need to rush. When love came again, it would come as a choice, not as pressure. Months later, Clara stood at her window on a quiet evening, city lights glowing softly below her. She thought about everything. Mason's laughter, the screen lighting up, the silence in her apartment afterward, the long road of healing. None of it broke her. It shaped her. She whispered a final goodbye to the version of herself who once waited for someone else to choose her. Then she smiled and said, Never again. Clara Hill wasn't a woman abandoned at the altar. She was a woman who walked away from the wrong future. And in doing that she saved her life.